Hello everyone, today's video has been a long time in the making, perhaps the longest time in the making when it comes to review on this channel, because today we're talking about the big white whale, the Big Mac Daddy of shmup arcade hardware, at least in terms of price, the EXA Arcadia. And for those not familiar with the EXA, I did do an interview with the CEO of the team many years ago, so if you want to hear directly from the horse's mouth the ideas and philosophies behind the EXA Arcadia, you can check out that old podcast interview. But in brief, what the goal of the EXA is, at least according to the website, is to bring back the old school style arcade hardware, turning away from the recent trends of Japanese arcades which involve coin revenue shares and forced online services, and going back to the old school Neo-Geo style of you buy the system, you buy the cartridge, you stick it in an arcade cabinet, end of business transaction, you're good to go. These are the stated goals of the EXA at least, and the purpose of today's video is to see, does the EXA actually live up to these stated goals, and does it perform as advertised? But before we start, I'd like to begin with a few disclaimers. The first is that I do not consider this the final definitive review of the EXA Arcadia, primarily because I am not part of the target demographic, because the EXA primarily targets arcade owners or high roller PCB collectors. I am neither an arcade owner or a high roller PCB collector. When it comes to spending within the genre, I'm definitely on a moderate budget and I have moderate taste. So I'll buy a PlayStation, I'll even buy a cheap Saikyo board, but I'm definitely not going anywhere near four-figure purchases. And like I said in my previous video about original arcade hardware, if you are the average shmup fan or even a pretty hardcore shmup fan, I do not think it is worth it to spend thousands of dollars on original PCBs or something like the EXA Arcadia. In my opinion, isn't worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze because emulation just keeps getting better and better and catching up with this type of hardware. And also the console ports themselves are also improving, especially with stuff like the M2 ports. That being said, the reason why I'm doing today's review is because over the years, a lot of people have been asking me, Mark, what do you think about the EXA Arcadia? Mark, what do you think about the EXA Arcadia? And even I have wondered, well, what do I think of the EXA Arcadia? What will my reaction be when I get the hardware in front of me? And over these years, I've been kind of keeping my eye out for a chance to play it and give my impressions of it. But of course, I do not have the budget to afford one, and I also don't have the inclination to purchase one because let's take a step back and remember the cost of this machine. So the EXA Arcadia, by the time you get everything purchased and put together, is probably going to be running you around $5,000 to $6,000. Just for context, the truck that I have driven for the past 12 years cost me $1,000. And so for me, those types of numbers for any type of video game, maybe even something like Dodonpachi Campaign, which I really want to play, even that, I do not think I could justify that type of price tag because I am not in this high roller PCB collector demographic. But that being said, I also think it is a good idea for me to take a look at the EXA hardware because I can provide a impartial analysis of it. Because when it comes to buying these really high-end items, can't fully trust the people who purchased it because they have sunk so much money into their purchase, and also because there is a sort of self-selection bias when you get to that high of a price point where only a certain type of person is able to afford an EXA Arcadia, and usually that certain type of person has a lot of discretionary income and probably views stuff like money and value a little bit differently than someone like myself. This is something I've noticed among people with higher incomes, is that the higher your income gets, things just keep getting more expensive, but you also don't seem to mind the increased cost. Like if you go to a fancy restaurant, they'll bring you a Coke Zero, and that Coke Zero in that fancy restaurant, even though it is the same as the gas station Coke Zero, costs 3 times the amount of money. And your mind's like, well, I'm sitting here in a fancy chair and I've got myself a fancy glass, so that makes this Coke 3 times more valuable. And I think that is kind of the mentality that starts to crop up with these high roller arcade PCB collectors, where, you know, the difference between $1,000 and $2,000 For me, that's like a massive jump. That's a whole nother truck that I drive for 12 years. But when you're in that income bracket, it's like, whatever, an extra $1,000. What's that mean to me? So I bring this up once again just to emphasize for this channel, The Electric Underground, reviewing such an expensive item is uncharted territory. We are leaving Idaho and entering the roulette tables of Las Vegas. And so with that said, I'd like to thank the patron that made today's review possible, because what ended up happening is that a patron reached out to me and said, hey, I have an EXA. Do you want me to ship it to you for you to test out and review, and then you can ship it back to me? And I thought that sounds like a pretty cool deal. But shout outs to this guy, because he absolutely took a massive risk shoving all this expensive hardware in the mail, getting it to me, and then having me test it and then mail it back to him. So thank you very much. So today's video is going to be split into 3 sections. The first section is my initial impressions of the hardware and setup process. The second section is playing the software and testing out the game performance. And the third section is my thoughts on buying this thing as a private owner and whether or not I think that's a good idea. And so let's begin with the hardware and initial setup. I remember the first time I unboxed the EXA and placed it on the kitchen table, my first reaction was, wow, this really is a PC in a box. And I say that because prior to seeing the EXA in person, I always imagined it to kind of be like a PS4, where deep down, you know that it is just a PC in a box. But because of the way the console presents itself, you kind of buy the facade that there is some kind of specialized hardware going on in there. But in the case of the EXA, that idea is shattered immediately, because you can actually see the motherboard ports. They're kind of plugged up, but you can see the motherboard ports and you can see that it is a graphics card, and that, oh, this is actually just a PC in a box, especially because the metal case is almost exactly like the metal case on my desktop PC. And so I did find that a bit shocking at first. But to be fair, when I went ahead and looked at the competition for the EXA, the Taito Zero X, it also is a PC in a box, just nakedly so. So I guess this is the way modern arcade hardware looks. It's just, that's a PC. We can see it right with our own eyes. And I guess that makes sense, because unlike a console, which you still look at when you play it, these arcade machines are shoved inside a cabinet typically, and so you never actually see them, and you can just kind of imagine, oh yeah, there's some type of original arcade board in there, I assume. So that was a bit surprising to me, but I guess that is the way arcade machines look. Though I do wonder if they maybe should have put a plate over those unused ports, because it is incredibly tempting to just unplug them and start plugging stuff in just to see what will happen. Probably nothing, but you do kind of get curious seeing those ports out there like that. And so the second thing that stood out to me right away, are on the sides of the EXA case, are these big warranty void if seal broken stickers. There's 2 of them, one on each side of the case. And the reason why these stood out to me so vividly is because these type of stickers are actually illegal. You cannot have them. They are not legal to put on hardware, because in the United States, you cannot bar someone from accessing their legally purchased hardware. And I found this to be pretty concerning, not only because these stickers are illegal, but when you combine them with the language of the website, which says orders are considered final and cannot be canceled, you just get the impression that once you pay for your EXA Arcadia, whatever happens with it, your money is off in Singapore. You are not getting it back. You are totally at the mercy of this company. It just doesn't feel right, and it gives the presentation of the hardware a really odd, aggressive edge. And I do know that back in the day, like, Sony would stick these type of stickers on the bottom of PlayStation 2s, but those were kind of hidden away and you have to try to access them. But on the EXA Arcadia, not only do you have 2 of them just sitting there on the case, but you actually have 2 on each of the game cartridges as well, just making it crystal clear that EXA does not want you opening anything up. Do not open up that hardware. Do not open up those game cartridges. These are strictly forbidden from access. Not exactly the best first impression, but we'll return to this point later. And so looking at the front of the EXA, you have the video outputs on the right, which are HDMI, DisplayPort, and DVI-D. And so there is no native analog video out. It is a modern graphics card. And so if you want analog video out of the EXA Arcadia, what you need to do is you need to drop the resolution down to 4:3 480p. And you can do this with a dip switch or with a service menu. And once you get it down to that resolution, you run it through a digital to analog converter, just like you would do on any other computer, and you can get it to a VGA monitor that way. But during my review, I was not able to get my digital to analog converter to accept the EXA signal, and I did verify that I was getting 40p by connecting it to an LCD monitor, but my DAC just refused to work with the signal. My thought as to why this is because my DAC is HDMI to VGA, and it looks like the instruction manual recommends using the DVI-D video output for analog conversion. So I do believe it is possible to get the EXA to connect to a VGA CRT with a converter. It's just not as plug and play as something like a Windows PC. So ironically, the EXA is more like a console than a PC when it comes to selecting video resolutions and working with converters. You have to make sure that they are compatible beforehand. Then next to the video outputs, we have the dip switches. These are pretty cool as they change the video output settings of the hardware without needing to go into the menu. So dip switch 1 is Tate mode, dip switch 2 is 40p mode, and dip switch 3 flips the videos so that you can get upside down or you can get reverse Tate when you pair it with the first dip switch. And then the fourth dip switch is non-functional and just kind of hangs out. Then there's the JVS port, which handles the controls for the EXA. In order to get the EXA to output controls, you need to pair it with a JVS I/O board. The EXA does not include this board in your regular order, by the way, so you need to buy it separately. Otherwise, you literally cannot play the EXA. The way the board works is that it connects to the EXA via a USB-A cable, and then you connect your arcade stick controls to the I/O board via a 20-pin harness. Luckily, I have a Brooks board which has a 20-pin harness, but if you want to connect your buttons and arcade stick to the harness directly, you are going to need to buy a special cable to do that. Or if you want to go a more simple route, there is an alternative I/O board that you can buy that the patron included, luckily, that converts PS3/Xbox 360 USB into a signal that the EXA can accept, which I find kind of ironic and probably introduces a bit of extra lag. But it is pretty convenient if you don't want to go all out on wiring your arcade stick to the I/O board. So then we have the main feature of the EXA, which are its arcade cartridge slots. As far as the build quality of the carts, I'd be extremely careful with them as they do have a little bit of a rattle. And like I said before, if something goes wrong with these carts, you cannot open them up to try and repair them yourself because of the warranty stickers. So you got to ship those bad boys back to customer service, which probably is going to cost you money and time. And for example, of the 3 carts that were sent to me, SDOJ, Akata Blue, and Akai Katana, the Akata Blue cartridge no longer works. And so the patron was wondering for the review if I'd open up the card and look inside. But I decided not doing that because I do not want to void his warranty and cost him $1,500. The budget for this video is not worth it. And so I just went ahead and put that Akata Blue cart right back, untouched, pristine, ready to be shipped off to customer service for repair. But you can see how with the design of these cartridges, they can begin as sort of a fun novelty and collector's item, at least for private owners, and kind of end up as a terrifying liability by the end. Because if you cannot get it sent off to repair, your game will not work and you have just spent over $1,000 on this cartridge. As far as actually fitting into the slots of the arcade machine, however, they do fit nicely and they do have a nice gentle click in where it's not grabbing too tight, but you're also not worrying about them falling out. So they do feel pretty good once you get it inside the arcade machine, but maybe you want to leave it in there for safety. So now I'd like to comment on a big feature that is missing from the EXA Arcadia hardware that I think was really important to conclude, which is online updates. And while I do agree with EXA's statements about not wanting to have forced online servers and making arcade owners and everyone have to connect to an online server to play, I think having the EXA being able to update via an online connection, however, is pretty dang important, and I think was a very big oversight, kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because now the way that it works is that if something comes up with your EXA, or if some kind of improvement is found, like recently there was an improvement to the EXA which reduced the input lag, well, in order for you to get that update, what you need to do is you need to box up your EXA, ship it back to them, have them updated, and then pay for them to ship it back to you, which is going to cost a lot of time and money. And also, I don't think this really works well for the health of the console, because now whenever there could be some slight tweaks and improvements to make the EXA better in terms of software, it's probably not going to be worth it for the developers, because that would involve them having to manually update possibly hundreds of separate consoles. I think it was one of those ideas where on paper they're looking back at Neo-Geos and cave arcade machines, and they're like, back then they didn't have online updates, it was just the way the boards were. But let's not forget how hot of a mess a lot of old arcade boards are, like Pink Suites, for example, where there's all these different crazy revisions of the boards, or like DFK, where the first version of it's like a complete hot mess, and you have all these expensive, weird board revisions. Wouldn't it have been nice back in the day if you bought a cave board and it was Pink Suites, and then they just updated the board and you didn't have to keep rebuying it and dealing with all these problems? So I think this was a decision that sounded good, like nostalgically, but in terms of modern day business, I just do not think it was a good idea, especially when you consider international customers. So it is one thing for maybe a dude in the United States, or for a dude in Japan or nearby, wherever the EXA headquarters are. That's one thing where they have to send it, and yes, it's inconvenient. But what about your international customers in places like South America, where getting the EXA from the mail the first time is going to be a miracle, and it is going to be way too risky to set something this expensive and valuable in the mail again, because their mail system is not very reliable. And as I learned talking to Shmups BR and a lot of the South American guys, the mail system itself might just rob you. You might stick your EXA in the mail and some guy at the post office is like, oh, look what I got today. So that model for international customers, I think, is a very bad idea. Whereas if they'd got the EXA and would be able to plug it in on their side and just update it on their side, same thing with repairs, where if something goes wrong with the hardware, they don't have to just automatically send it to you. They could open it up and repair it themselves. I think for international customers, that is a much more attractive design philosophy. Now, I remember when I talked to the EXA CEO about some of the design philosophies, he did seem to be pretty concerned about piracy, and that seemed to have been a big thing where he didn't want the EXA to get pirated in regions like China and regions like South America. And I do get that, but it seems like there is sort of a balancing point with this, where if you get too overprotective, you're just going to be punishing the decent, hardworking, legally purchasing international customers, and you're probably not ultimately going to stop piracy in the end. Time and time again, Sony, Microsoft, all these different companies with very large resources, decades of experience with fighting piracy, just cannot seem to hold back the tide. They can delay it, but they can't stop it forever. And like I said, when it comes to not being able to even open up the hardware to try and fix even minor problems, I think this is going to be just a bad design decision for everyone all around. So I really wish EXA were not so stringent with those warranty stickers. They were not so stringent with their philosophy on their hardware design. I think it makes it a lot less attractive to purchase, because it's kind of scary now, because it feels like you're totally at the mercy of the company if something goes wrong with the hardware. But for now, let's just say when it comes to the first section and my impressions of the hardware, this was not exactly winning me over, especially at such a high price point. And I do know one of the big selling points of the EXA is the fact that it is supposed to be the most powerful, one of the most powerful arcade machines in existence. And that is really cool sounding on paper. But the problem with that is, as of right now, I don't think the EXA really has the library to justify such a powerful machine and to justify such a high price point. A lot of the games running on the EXA, like SDOJ, Akai Katana, I think they could have ran perfectly well on a much lower spec machine. And these days, power isn't the end all be all. I mean, look at the Nintendo Switch. In terms of hardware, it is an anemic piece of garbage, but it has the software to back it up. It has the marketing and player base to back it up. And so it's not all about the hardware. I do get what they're going for, but I think they kind of overshot that aspect where maybe it's a bit too powerful and too expensive, at least for my taste. So this brings us to section 2, the software and performance of the EXA. So section 1 was kind of a rough time, but section 2 is where things start looking good for the EXA, because I think the software and performance and presentation of the EXA is where this bad boy absolutely shines. And I think this is what's going to win over a lot of people, because once you get the EXA set up and running and you plug it into your monitor and you see that beautiful menu and these really awesome attract modes for the games, and then it has a nice, sleek, easily understood UI, and navigating the system is really nice and convenient as well, where you can select your game, and then if you want to exit your game in free play mode, you can just hold down button 1 and start, and that will bring you back to the menu, and you can select another game. It's very nice, it's very accessible, and it does seem like something that would be really cool to have at like a meet 'em up or gathering or in an arcade. You go in there and see, oh my god, there's SDOJ running, and look how nice it looks. I think the software and performance is where EXA really shines. And so for today's review, the 2 games I have on selection are Akai Katana and SDOJ. And I thought these 2 games were very fitting choices, not only because they are probably going to be the most popular releases on the EXA, at least among shmup players, but also because these are the 2 games that EXA ended up sending a cease and desist to MAME over. So before these came out on the EXA, MAME got a cease and desist to have them removed from MAME, which is kind of a painful irony that in order for these games to return to the arcade, they must be taken away from emulation, which is the way like 90% of the shmup players actually are able to access these games. And it can be said that this cease and desist didn't do too much, because you can get these games to launch on MAME. And I am assuming that what EXA was doing was kind of following along what Cave wanted them to do in order to get the license. But for me, it's still an ugly line to cross, and it kind of gives me a weird feeling while I'm playing these games on the EXA. It's like, yeah, no, it's super cool that I am playing it right here, but too bad for the kids at home who can't play them on MAME anymore. Talking about how the games perform technically, it was very nice to play them on the EXA. And that brings us to the section of the review I think a lot of you are curious about, which is the input lag readings of SDOJ and Akai Katana on the EXA Arcadia. Because when you look on their website, they are saying that these respond within 1 frame of input lag. So I went ahead and busted out my lag testing setup and took a look. But remember, I could never get the EXA to connect to my CRT monitor, so I ended up having to connect it to my gaming LCD monitor. Now my LCD monitor is very responsive. It has 1 frame of input lag. So basically what we have to do on today's lag test is sort of just factor out the display lag, right? So when you take the input lag tests and you look at them, I am getting the games to respond for the most part with 2 frames of input lag. However, when you go ahead and minus out the display lag of my LCD monitor, then yes, the games are in fact responding with 1 frame of input lag as advertised, and that is really cool and really impressive, and I think the major selling point of the EXA. All else being said, that is one thing the EXA can lay claim to that is pretty damn awesome. The fact that the games are as responsive as they are and they do run as well as they do. And I will say I didn't end up spending a whole lot of time playing the SDOJ port and the Akai Katana port of the EXA because the EXA hardware is so damn expensive. I actually felt incredibly uncomfortable with this machine in my home, and I definitely didn't want to put it out in my shmup shed. So I took it over to my parents and basically told them, okay, this half of the house is on lockdown for the weekend. No one can come in this half of the house because God forbid anyone even look at the EXA the wrong way. If something goes wrong with this machine, I literally cannot afford to replace it. If something goes wrong with the games, I cannot afford to replace them. So it was actually kind of a terrifying experience having this thing and reviewing it. And so as a consequence, I played it as minimally as possible. I played it for about a day straight, and I did have a fun time with the different modes, especially the EXA mode of SaiDaiOuJou, where you get a DFK style bullet canceling hyper. I thought that was really cool. And I also liked in the original mode of SaiDaiOuJou, you could actually play as the DLC purple ship from the 360 port. I thought that was really cool as well. Both pretty awesome additions and features, which brings us to the final section, the conclusion of my thoughts on whether the EXA Arcadia is worth it for private ownership. And this is a bit complicated because it really comes down to how you view the EXA Arcadia and what your relationship with money is, essentially. Because when it comes to the longevity of the hardware, I'm pretty concerned about that for a number of reasons. The first I've talked about with the warranty void stickers, but the second comes from a story that the patron who sent me the EXA told me. And the patron did swear that he has logs to back up his story and that he can verify that it is true. And so I'll go ahead and pass it on in this video. And basically what ended up happening is that this patron actually ordered an EXA before the EXA he sent me. So he has two EXAs. The first EXA that he ordered arrived and it had like a really weird mildewy smell to it. And he didn't want to put it inside his arcade cabinet because he was afraid the mildew would spread or break the machine and break his cabinet. He thought it would be a big problem. So he ended up contacting customer service and they said that they didn't consider the mildew smell a defect. And so they basically denied repairing his EXA or taking it back or whatever the arrangement was going to be. So he went Maverick mode and ended up cutting open the warranty voided if seal broken stickers and opened up the EXA and started to clean it up inside. But during the process of opening the EXA and cleaning it up, he ended up unplugging the CMOS battery because he didn't want to get it wet, and he put it aside. And then when he went to go put the battery back in, it ended up locking up the system and the BIOS ended up locking him out. So then he contacted EXA support and they said, yeah, okay, we'll fix it for $500, but I guess he never got any follow-up or something happened there. And so what ended up happening is he ended up buying a second EXA, and that is actually the EXA he sent to me. So the dude has two EXAs, one that needs to be serviced or repaired or whatever. And so you can take that story and interpret it in different ways. I personally think is an example of why it is a bad idea to not let your customers open up the hardware so that they can maintain it and don't need to have it shipped back for you just for cleaning and things like that. But the part of the story that has stuck with me the most isn't exactly the customer service aspect. It is the question, okay, what happens when these batteries start to die in the future? What happens when EXA is no longer around to service your arcade machine and unlock the BIOS and take care of the security side when these parts start to fail and need to be replaced? And so I don't think that's going to be a pretty situation. And ironically, probably your best hope is for some hackers in the future to come along and be able to unlock that BIOS for you if EXA are no longer around. And maybe you could say, oh, okay, well, EXA may be out of goodwill if they're going to shut down. Maybe in their final months before shutting down, they'll go ahead and unlock the BIOS or unlock the security of the system for all the owners. Except they can't do that because the EXA does not have the ability to be updated online. And so in order for that to happen, everyone is going to have to, for one last time, ship their EXAs back to customer service. Then the EXA team is going to have to unlock everyone's EXAs and then ship them back to everyone. It just seems to me pretty unrealistic. And what could end up happening, and what's scary to think about, is you could end up having that your EXA dies, no one bothers to figure out how to unlock it, and then you have potentially thousands of dollars worth of dead hardware and dead arcade cartridges. And so that, on top of the locked up hardware and the lack of online updating, the lack of online leaderboards. So all that stuff for me doesn't make the EXA a very compelling long-term private ownership prospect. But that all being said, if you are the type with a large disposable income and you are willing to sort of roll the dice and pick this up and just think about playing it in the short term and playing this really cool port of SDOJ with low input lag, and you're willing to just kind of hope that in the future someone's going to figure out how to unlock it in case your battery breaks or whatever ends up happening, or you have to get it serviced and EXA are no longer around. I mean, that is possible. That is kind of a scary prospect. So I would say on the side of safety, I'd warn against private ownership of the EXA. But in terms of public consumption, where if there's an EXA near you or someone you know has an EXA, I think it is definitely cool to get on and to play and to check out. And I do think its best purpose, like the best purpose of all high-end arcade hardware, is for meet 'em ups and for other players to try out and enjoy. It's just kind of scary to have this machine in your home and knowing how expensive and possibly sensitive it is. So these are my thoughts on the EXA Arcadia. Thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully I haven't rubbed too many people the wrong way. You just never know. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, accepting Panda, Admiral Coconut, Arnold, Alexander Pfeiffer, Alexander Talbot, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Aaron Solis, Arrow Viper, Bo, Ben, Vito Dames, Borgie 22, Brian Shiver, Chase Palumbo, Chattel Maltese, Chris Yuzefovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Clara Cliff, Clammy Coyote, Coast, Colorboy, Cooksand 666, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Danchi, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ 420 Praise It, Eric H Fanticide, FCK, Francisco Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Jake Ryan, JLab, JB RPG, John Kelly, Game Boy Guru, K, K2, Khalil Reedy, Contain, Praise the Boys, K Horse, Malaise, Matt O'Leary, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Mechalin, Michael McCord, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, Neon Dagger Games, Oakland Kugels, Philip Mason, Rattlecat, Raul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Sarah, Scanline City, Seesaw STG, Shmup Junkie, Sir Pong, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Super Funk, Tamzarian, Takero Mucho, The Boot Rex, Their Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, Tiram, Sugumo, 2YU, Twilight EX, Utakoi Roots, Vic Viper, Wabby Legs, X20 Specs, Hoghog, and Utskaya. Thanks for watching.